Thank you all so much for being here. This is a little bit like the 1950s when your mother was still home, so you went home for lunch as a break in school, and you came back all energized, ready for those final 2 classes before you went out into the schoolyard. So we thank you all for being here. And do you have Mr. Lane's place? Mr. Lane. Please give me Mr. Lane. Okay, good. Our next witness is Lee Lane, who is a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and is co-director for AEI's project on climate engineering. Mr. Lane was previously a consultant to Charles River Associates International, where he produced analysis of climate and energy issues. Welcome, Mr. Lane. Whenever you're ready, please begin.
Thank you very much, Chairman Markey. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon to discuss with you a piece of legislation that's obviously quite ambitious and important. I refer, of course, to the American Clean Energy and Security Act. The draft bill is an ambitious effort to grapple with what I believe is a very serious challenge posed by rising levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. With climate change, though, there are no easy solutions, and many purported solutions are actually likely to amount to costly errors. If enacted, this legislation would work far-reaching changes on the American economy, yet the bill's approach appears to be based on assumptions that clash with what I think are 4 basic realities of current climate policy. And my statement focuses on these, and let me just summarize them briefly, if I may. First, the costs of the proposed emissions cutbacks would very probably exceed their benefits. Rapid emission cuts, like those called for in the bill's cap-and-trade provisions, will lead to needlessly high costs. Furthermore, the draft bill's regulatory mandates are likely to raise costs without adding benefits. You heard some allusions to the problem of a duplicative system this morning in some of the testimony from the first panel. I suspect that this is potentially a serious problem. Secondly, deep unilateral U.S. emissions cuts will not improve the prospects for reaching an effective global accord and may actually harm them. I suspect this is a place where there are some disagreements on the panel, but I think it's an issue worth discussing. Greenhouse gas control as an issue is 85% about striking a global bargain. It's only about 15% a matter of domestic energy and emissions control policy. Enacting this bill in its current form would amount to giving away America's biggest stack of bargaining chips, its willingness to incur costs in domestic greenhouse gas controls. And it would amount to giving it away for free, and before the serious bargaining has really even begun. The U.S. has not used this kind of strategy in its bargains on trade negotiations or arms controls or other important negotiations, and I think for very good reasons. Third, with the legislation or without it, the conditions that would be required to reach an effective global greenhouse gas control accord are in fact absent. For many key nations, the costs of a greenhouse gas control agreement exceed its perceived benefits. Globally, the benefits are both very unevenly distributed and highly uncertain. These same factors have defeated previous attempts to reach agreement. My greatest fear is that this bill could become a step toward another agreement that is, like the Kyoto Protocol, both costly and ineffectual. Fourth, the U.S. can and should take action on climate change? My answer to Mr. Inslee's question earlier today is that, yes, I take climate change quite seriously. But realism about climate change demands a serious but patient approach to greenhouse gas curbs, a combination of gradual emissions cuts, basic science research, and adaptation can, I think, protect U.S. national interests without incurring excessive costs and without causing undue conflict with other global powers like China, India, Japan, and Russia. Some features of the draft bill reflect what I believe are valuable insights. For example, I believe that it is right to stress adaptation and the need to advance technology. These are crucial aspects of climate policy. In these areas, my statement offers a few suggestions about how its efforts, the bill's efforts, in these directions might be made more cost-effective. I hope those suggestions are useful and that as the bill evolves, it does so in ways that will increase its benefits and decrease its costs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lane, very much. Our next witness is the Reverend Douglas Smith. He is the Executive Director of the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. He was formerly on the staff of the World Council of Churches in Geneva. Welcome, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much, members of the committee. I'm Doug Smith.
Could you move the microphone in a little bit closer, please?
I'm Doug Smith, the Executive Director of the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy, an organization that seeks to address hunger, poverty, and the care for God's creation through the development and adoption of sound policy. While the faith community is so diverse that no one can really claim to represent it completely, I would like to share with you the perspective of many of us, including the National Council of Churches and a number of our ecumenical and interfaith organizations. First and foremost, we applaud the inclusion of strong international adaptation assistance measures in the draft of the American Clean Energy and Security Act. We see this as a necessary component of any U.S. legislation, particularly as we work to ensure strong and robust responses to a post-Kyoto agreement. I would like to speak to the importance of this section as understood by the faith community. We must ensure that generations know that we acted in good faith to protect all people from the impact of global climate change. Because of the interconnectedness of God's creation, we share not only the need to provide adaptation funding for developing countries, but also the responsibility as people of good conscience and, for many of us, of common faith. Our best scientists and global security analysts tell us that climate change will impact hunger, poverty, and war very nearly. By the middle of this century, 1 billion people will likely face significant water shortages. And with 75% of persons in developing countries subsisting on agriculture, they can be assured of a famine-filled future. And sadly, we can be assured of an unstable geopolitical future if we do not act with boldness, act with compassion, and act with immediacy. In the faith-based NGO community, we are already witnessing how climate change is complicating our capacity to serve others internationally. The Evangelical Lutheran Church in America and the Virginia Interfaith Center recently sent one of my staff to Nicaragua. Mr. Wren tells the story of Santa Marta, an ancient East Coast indigenous Mosquito community whose language has never needed a word for hurricane. And yet in 2007, Felix, a Category 5 hurricane, practically wiped Santa Marta off of the map. As weather patterns shift as a result of global climate change, people like the citizens of Santa Marta are struggling to adapt to emerging realities for which they are unprepared. This is why it's so important that we provide adaptation funding to developing countries. It's because the international consequences of global climate change are already today impacting millions of people, and that leads the faith community to be united in our call to provide for international adaptation assistance to protect the most vulnerable communities around the world. We urge the committee to support the language included in the American Clean Energy and Security Act, but we do ask for the following legislative priorities to find their way into any final bill. Number one, the funds should be appropriately targeted in terms of recipient countries. They should go to the most vulnerable developing countries, and no more than 10% should go annually to any one country. Two, local communities must be engaged in a participatory process with adequate monitoring, evaluation, and transparency. Number three, the funds provided should be in addition to current funding levels of official development assistance. Number four, the funds should be appropriately targeting adaptation around climate impacts, around drought, natural disasters, disease, and migration. And number five, legislation should also enhance developing country efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by reducing deforestation, encouraging reforestation, and by transitioning to cleaner energy technologies. We in the U.S. have a moral responsibility to those in need during this global crisis. I would say that loving our neighbors includes equipping them to protect themselves from climate change. And I'd like to ask you today to commit to providing substantial financial support annually of no less than $7 billion per year. That is the minimum that we should be able to do for those in desperate need. I thank you for this opportunity to testify on these important matters and for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Reverend, very much.